so happy to introduce my friend and colleague Dave Turok this morning. I hope you all have people in your life like Dave, and what I mean by that are people who you don't necessarily work with every day, but you are so excited to see at conferences or excited to collaborate with from afar. Just people who lift you up when you see them, and so Dave is one of those folks for me. A few things about Dave's cred. He completed family medicine training at Brown and OB-GYN training at the University of Utah, where he's still at the University of Utah as an associate professor who runs their family planning division, or very soon to be official family planning division. And I think also I've watched Dave in a really short period of time has gotten together this amazing interdisciplinary group of researchers, both MDs and PhDs, to invest in some incredible studies and advocacy work and policy work. And so he'll be talking a little bit about the major initiative today, which is called Her Salt Lake. This is a community-based cohort study of 4,400 people in Salt Lake who've received contraceptive services. Just amazing. Dave also has had long-time connections with community-based health clinics, including Planned Parenthood centers, and directs their abortion and vasectomy services. At Utah, also Dave is the PI for the Utah site of the NICHD Contraceptive Trials Network, and in that work has been involved in some of the studies that have integrated into some of your practice every day. So for example, using IUDs for emergency contraception, studies that have come out of Dave's group. Also is involved in the K24, KL2 programs at the University of Utah, so doing a lot of mentoring as well. And I'll just say one other thing about Dave. One thing that's been so exciting and inspiring for me to watch is Dave is such a generous and welcoming senior colleague and collaborator. I feel like Dave's umbrella is really wide and has space for a lot of people under it. And so over the years, Dave has, I think, been so welcoming of people like me, especially junior people, often junior women, saying, hey, let me plug you in. We've got some really great stuff going on here, and you've got some great stuff. Let's meet up. And so I've just been so inspired and appreciative of that with Dave. So please join me in welcoming him.
Thanks. I don't need to use this also, right?
No.
Just, okay, thanks. This is a little much. Hey, speaking of senior, I realize the idea of an old white guy from Utah coming to talk about reproductive justice may not warm the hearts of all, fully aware. And if I wasn't fully aware of that, in the last few days, asked one of my very thoughtful, smart, young, hip colleagues, women colleagues, for some help with this talk, and I divulged that, yes, I'm going to Wisconsin and I'm going to talk about reproductive justice. And that wasn't met with just like a giggle, like a full belly laugh, like a, and then, she's trying to sort of stop Kyle Myers, you'll hear more about her. Anyway, so I fully understand that, and I'm really hoping that this is going to be an exploration and exchange about reproductive justice and some thoughts about it, and to hear from you all what you are doing and thinking and see as opportunities and challenges, and feel free to interject at any point or stop or weigh in, and we can make it more entertaining for everybody, I'm sure. And I just want to highlight at the beginning that if we are going to make advances in reproductive health and reproductive rights, and we definitely need to, we got to really embrace reproductive justice. So we receive a bunch of grant funding, and the outline for the talk is we're going to talk a little bit about reproductive injustice, discuss the reproductive justice principles, and then I'm going to share with you what we've done to try to incorporate some of those principles and hopefully hear from you about opportunities and challenges. So can we do just at the beginning a quick little survey of familiarity with the term reproductive justice, you've heard, okay? So new to some. And then I'm throwing this out now, and if people want to initiate the conversation now, that's fine. If you want to hold it or at some other point, but we're definitely going to talk about it at the end, about the Wisconsin opportunities and challenges for that. And I'll throw that out now so that people can start thinking about ways, places you see where that can work, and you might be thinking already about infusing reproductive justice into work you're doing, and hopefully will trigger some new ideas. Any comments, questions, thoughts so far? So the origins of U.S. reproductive injustice are worth noting, and it's very much worthwhile considering that our country is founded on two acts of barbarism, and those are the genocide of indigenous people and slavery. And the being able to have this building and this structure in this place is only possible, in this institution and our daily lives is only possible because there were people here before who have been nearly eliminated in order to make that happen. And the idea that a human being could own another human being is not just part of our culture, it's part of our law, and was for a very long time. And if you tie that to reproductive justice and reproduction, the fact that a slave owner who had sex or raped a slave, that child was actually that slave owner's property. And that was the law. It wasn't that way in England. And that actually foundation, I think, explains a lot of what we have seen since then and still today. And there's other aspects of reproductive injustice in the US. There was a eugenics movement and forced sterilization. And the Nazi program of forced sterilization was based on the success in the US, where tens of thousands of people who were thought to be not capable parents were sterilized essentially without their consent. And that took a very long time to go away and was still going on a few decades ago, and a decade ago, in California. So part of our country's long history of interfering with free expression of sexuality and intimacy includes laws against interracial marriage. And clearly, these racist laws interfered with a couple's ability to have children and have their children and nurture them in safe and loving environments. And this Supreme Court case, Loving versus Virginia, was a movie in the recent past. But this is not like ancient history. This is within the last 50 years. And again, that's the law, and was the law that has since been repealed. If you want to look at social change in the US, to me, the ability to vote is a great opportunity to do that. And when you think about at the very beginning, the opportunity to vote in this country was about being a white male landowner, and very few people were. And that first arrow is about loosening suffrage to allow, white males who were not landowners the ability to vote. I got a pretty significant bump with that. And then the amendment with removing slavery as law in the country had a slight bump, and then a decline with Jim Crow laws. And then obviously the biggest and most significant bump was women's suffrage. And again, like, that's less than 100 years old. We went quite far before that was part of the deal. So, thinking about it and framing, none of these things happened without effort. A lot of confrontation existed to make these things happen. And change requires that. There's gonna be some interaction, and it's not all pleasant, but in order for us to get to a just and equitable society, we need to really uphold the promise of democracy. And nothing spells that out better, I think, than this. So, at the core of reproductive justice is the idea that all reproductive persons need to be treated with respect and dignity in a context where they're free from fear. And when we approach research and practice that aids reproductive persons, we keep this principle in mind, and I think that will help us get to a better place faster. So, reproductive justice is based on these three quite simple ideas: that each person has the right to have a child, not have a child, and parent their children in safe and healthy environments. And having a child also includes the idea that people have the ability to deliver their baby in the place that they decide is best. And not having a child obviously means access to contraception and abortion and the ability to control your fertility. And this third aspect, I think, is really the place where we can bring in people who are working on on all kinds of social justice issues. But parenting children in safe and healthy environments means that parents have a livable wage and children have a safe place to attend school and have a safe place to live free from violence in non-toxic environments. And that allows us the ability to really connect with people in all kinds of other movements: environmental movements, in education, in fair housing, in Black Lives Matter, in anti-gun violence, and anti-white supremacy. And those issues are going to be tied in through real reproductive justice work. So there's also this aspect of biology that we probably think about a lot more than other people who are thinking about, might be thinking more about social issues. But Jenny Higgins, as I've heard her say many times, nobody's having sex so that they can use contraception. Like, that's not a thing. Turns out people have sex ideally because it feels good. Unfortunately, some people don't have a choice about that, but that's a universal impetus for this. And biology is imperfect. If you think about that, those two cells that unite, there is a huge amount of genetic information that needs to exchange, and it doesn't always work out perfectly in those 24 hours for those two cells to become one cell. All of that activity, half of the time, does not result in a baby without interference. And contraception isn't perfect. It doesn't always work. Even the most effective methods have failure rates. And people have sex at times when they don't have a choice about it. They are forced to have it either through coercion or physical violence. And I think intrinsic to me showing up to work every day is this idea that just because a person had sex with another person who they don't think is a great person to spend the rest of their lives, parenting a child with, doesn't mean that they should be linked to them forever. And sperm and egg union don't discriminate by that fact. It works just as well. You get a whole, millions of sperm very close to an egg in the fallopian tube. There's no consideration for, this guy's, I really don't have respect for him, and he's like not a great person, but it's a good thing for now. Sperm, egg, that's not part of the equation for them. It's biology. So, reproductive justice was born from the idea that women of color had the right to be sexual and fertile people and have control over that. And this is a fabulous book that is, I think, the current synthesis on this. And I am embarrassed to say, when I saw the book and colleagues of mine said, you got to read this. I was like, I've been around so much chat about reproductive justice and have had so many fabulous lessons and really up-close tutoring sessions from really thoughtful people in our field, how much new information could be in there. It turns out a lot, and that's not my best self that doubted that, but I've come to grips with that. This is a great book because it's historically thorough, it's really thoughtful, and it provides guidance on potential action based on history and future desired results. And there's not a lot of things that are really well written that can do that in any subject. So, highly recommended. So now I want to talk a little bit about using some of that framework for reproductive justice and the Her Salt Lake Contraceptive Initiative. And this is a thing that did not start with some grand plan. And if somebody would have told me, I think 5 years ago when I started talking about this, that this is where we'd be, I would have been very surprised, happily surprised, but super surprised. And really my motivation to work on increasing contraceptive access in Salt Lake came from a dozen years of working at the community health centers in Salt Lake City, where I was the OB-GYN backup. And this is a big group. It's family docs. They deliver 1,200 babies a year. And this is for women with the fewest resources in our community. And we did what we could to provide contraceptive options for people. But this is not an exaggeration. Like every single day at work, and I was busy seeing a lot of people. Every single day I had a conversation with people about contraceptive options, and there was desire to have, to end the conversation with an IUD or an implant. That was their choice as the best method. And we had to juggle and lots of times say, like, I can't get that for you today. And sometimes I was thinking, like, I don't know when I'm going to be able to get that, or how I can help you get it. And that frustration kind of, was a significant motivator. You do something like that every day. It's irritating and, and hopefully pushes you to try to make it better. So I had this idea to, eliminate the cost for IUDs and implants for women in Salt Lake City. And I had no plan to do it, and I didn't have a team of people who were in on this. I just started saying it and thinking, like, if I say it, then I'll have to do it. So eventually, I talked with enough people who liked the idea, and we made it happen. So that start pushed, and with encouragement from others, pushed us to make all of the methods available. We have this awesome partnership in Salt Lake City with Planned Parenthood, and we've done a whole bunch of research studies there, but we had built up research infrastructure, and we were able to work in 4 clinics in Salt Lake County, and we knew there was a population in need, and that was the best provider to meet that need in our community. They're also the organization that's able to change the fastest, and adopt, and was willing to really change their model of care. And we created these 3 6-month periods, and they were already doing, they're the Title X provider in Utah, and they were all already doing a really good job at baseline. And that gave us a good platform to work from. They were also willing to totally revamp their contraceptive counseling, again, at baseline with the 6-month control period before we initiated the control period. And then the second 6 months, we said, everything's the same except for now we stock IUDs and implants, and there's a provider at every clinic so that anyone who walks through the door can get an IUD or an implant same day, but gets any method they want for free and can come back as many times as they want over a 3-year period. and exchange their method for free, no cost. And then finally, we had a 6-month media campaign where we essentially sent messages to people's handheld devices who lived in the target community and told them about the availability of contraception without cost at these clinics, and then could click on a link and essentially get an appointment at those clinics. So that was very helpful, and the sort of first round of results of this are now published in the American Journal of Public Health. And what we saw essentially was an increase from baseline use of IUDs and implants. And that's not certainly the only measure, but a measure, from 20% up to 37%, which is a real change, especially when applied over 11,000 people who were involved in this 18-month period. So we started doing all that before we were thinking specifically about each measure of the reproductive justice criteria, but we knew we wanted to improve and essentially attack this reproductive injustice in our community, which was women with the fewest resources have the greatest challenges to access all types of contraception. Just doesn't seem fair, doesn't seem right. So I was extremely fortunate to attend a one-day workshop with Loretta Ross, who was the woman on Looker's left in that slide with the book, who's founder of the reproductive justice movement and has encyclopedic knowledge and intense passion and lifelong commitment to this cause. And that was highly motivating, and I also work with this really fabulous group of people who were very invested in this. So having the opportunity to have an exchange and a project to talk about that was focused on reproductive justice and with somebody who was truly a leader and an inspirational force in the field informed a lot of this and was really pivotal. So these are the 9 principles, and we'll talk about each of these as they apply to what we're doing in Salt Lake and Utah. I just want to say at the beginning that some of this is not agreed upon by even everyone who's working on reproductive justice every day and are leaders in the field. Loretta Ross gets kind of a special accommodation because she was there at the beginning and has put the most effort into it. And one of the things that she says about reproductive justice, which I think is important, is that this is a criteria-based movement. Like, these are the criteria, and if you are doing this work and it meets these criteria, then it's reproductive justice work. And if the name of your organization has pro-life or pro-choice in it, that doesn't matter. The criteria are what matters. And it doesn't matter if the person or people at the head of the organization are black, brown, or white, or some other color. It matters that the criteria are met. And the criteria involve, a lot of ways to make sure that it is ideally not a white person at the head of the organization, and we'll talk about that. That's obviously a challenge in Utah, and I can see that could be a challenge in Wisconsin as well. So number 1, this is human rights focused, and this is all about the dignity of human beings, and there is an element that people need to have the ability, self-determination, and the ability to control their fertility. And what I mentioned about client-centered counseling at baseline was really critical. We used something that's been used at other Planned Parenthood clinics and started in Planned Parenthood in New York City. And it's this client-centered counseling principles are essentially, hey, we're here as a resource for you. It's based on tiered efficacy. This is the most effective stuff. Sterilization and IUDs and implants. This stuff also works, but not quite as well, and is reversible. And then these are less effective methods. And it asks and starts with getting people's thoughts on what is best for them and what they desire, and how what they perceive is going to fit best into their life. And it also, ends with, like, listen, this is not a lifelong commitment to this method that you chose today. Maybe you can change this. You can come back. We're here for you. And you can come back as often as you need. And I think that latitude promotes dignity and personal responsibility and the ability to make decisions. And I know for me, I spent, I'm not proud of this, but I realize it. I spent a lot of time trying to convince people to get an IUD or an implant earlier in my career, up until pretty recently, and got a lot of interesting information about how that might not be such a great thing. And probably the thing that has made clinical work for me more fun is this idea that, hey, listen, we want to help you get what you want, and if it doesn't work, come on back. That is a lot more fun than trying to be a used car salesman for contraception, which is less fun, and unfortunately, potentially coercive. So anyway, human rights focused, super important. Intersectionality. How familiar are people with that term? Some. Usually we have a tilt toward younger people being more familiar. Kimberly Crenshaw, who's here, came up with the term, and you could be one of a million people who've seen her TED Talk, which is awesome and an incredibly valuable 20 minutes. And intersectionality is this idea that, does somebody have a definition or an idea about that they really like and would be willing to share?
Well, it's that axes of inequality overlap and can work synergistically. So the metaphor I use with my students is that it's like paint colors. So if you think of race as like a yellow and your gender as a blue, you combine, they intersect to become green in an individual.
Right. And this is a picture from Kimberly Crenshaw's talk, and exactly what Jenny's saying. And behind her are the pictures of, unfortunately, African-American men who've been killed by the police. And she starts the talk with everyone standing, and essentially has people sit down when they no longer know the names that she's saying. And it's 1,000 people a year that are killed in the US by the police. And if, you're the proportion of, disproportionately, it's African Americans, and it's frequently people who are not involved in a violent crime, who are pulled over and things escalate. And then she goes on to mention the names of African American women who've been murdered by the police. And nobody, it's a very small, it's a room, starts out a room much bigger than this, and there's very few people, a handful of people who are standing at the end. And just think to yourself, right? Like, Freddie Gray, Eric Garner, those are names I think a lot of us know, Michael Brown, and try to think of one African American woman that fell from police brutality. So that intersection of race and gender explains, for example, why a company that hires black men to do manual labor and white women to do secretarial work doesn't hire black women. It also explains why a Latino man in a wheelchair doesn't have the same access to things that an able-bodied Latino man or a white man in a wheelchair has. And that's a component of what we're doing. And this is a tough area, I think, and challenging, but it's got to get confronted. And the value of intersectionality is, without identifying a phenomenon and naming it, you can't make it better. And one of the things that we were really encouraged to do by one of our funders, is to have a community advisory board for the Her Salt Lake project. And we got together a group through something called the Community Engagement Studio. There were young people who were clients and worked at clinics that were participating, and leaders in local minority groups. And there was a really amazing dialogue for a couple of hours between these people that was facilitated, and myself and Jeff Sanders and Kyle Myers, other members of our team, we were watching this, didn't interact and just listened. And it was amazing how essentially a decade of qualitative research in contraception was distilled by this group of people who were totally unaware that those things existed in a couple of hours. And we learned a lot. And at the end, we were very happy with ourselves. We had done this thing. We really fell so far short. But it at least gave us a place to start, and there's no way for that not to sound apologetic, unfortunately. But it's a place to look at where can we do better, and how do we understand what the challenges are for people who want to come in for contraception, and how can we best take care of them. And it requires listening and listening to a lot of people and hearing some stuff maybe that you might not like to hear about an organization you work with and for that you think's doing a good job. So Reproductive Justice Principle 3 is connecting local to global. There's a few ways that we've done this and tried to do it. We hope that there's a ripple effect of change in Salt Lake City and Utah, in that super red state, where other people consider, wow, there's a group of really conservative people that made some change in a controversial area. Maybe that will have some change. We're also trying to expand the program statewide through a program called Family Planning Elevated. And there's been some media awareness about the program, and and as more people learn, hopefully the message will be disseminated more globally. And there's also obviously the idea that fewer unintended pregnancies and fewer children and increased use of more effective contraception reduces the global burden of energy consumption and environmental impact. So you guys are quantitative scientists at some place deep inside, right? And these are some data from the beginning of the project. So each of these, the blue bars are essentially this control period for Her Salt Lake. And overall, this includes 11,509 people. So this is the first 6 months during the control period. This is condoms, diaphragms, emergency contraception, essentially looking at what people left clinic with. And condoms, diaphragm, emergency contraception, copper IUD, depot, implant, hormonal IUD, left with nothing or had missing data. And then, the thing that is the biggest is pill, patch, and ring throughout. But the thing that we also note that happens over time is that these less effective options become less frequently used, big drop in depot. And these more expensive options that were initially harder to get, especially the implant that is cost prohibitive for a Title X clinic to really provide effectively, those things all go up in a statistically significant sort of way. And there is, and that individual change on method selection means that the community changes simultaneously. There's also community support. This is a picture, one of the ways that we try to get community support. There's this thing called the Beer Bar in Salt Lake City, and the Beer Bar holds every one Sunday a month beer bingo for a nonprofit organization in town. We have been, with some pride, we have twice been the recipient of their kindness, and both times the Her Salt Lake project was, we set the record and then broke the record for funding. So at those events, it was pretty awesome to have people who benefited from the project come up to us and tell us their stories about how they weren't able to get a method and then they were. And then our data connect to the community also. And there's something called the Utah Population Database, which allows us to access health information on essentially anyone who receives health care in the state. And we're connected to the larger population that way. There's a sense of government, corporate, and individual responsibilities that's tied into reproductive justice. We've got 3,000 devices contributed by pharmaceutical companies. That was part of the corporate contribution. And we had two unexpected huge wins at the Utah State Legislature, not the place where people are generally looking for reproductive justice wins, this past legislative session. And one was House Bill 12. We were one of 6 states that did not expand Medicaid under the Affordable Care Act and did not have a Medicaid family planning waiver. We now have one, and we also have a pharmacist able to prescribe hormonal contraception bill, both of which will be enacted beginning in January 2019. So that did not happen by some fluke event. It happened by engaging with people who are not natural allies of this and spending a lot of time talking to people who at face value would have clearly rejected this. And the interesting thing was through a lot of preparatory work going into the legislative session, this thing, the Medicaid expansion for family planning, the family planning waiver, it didn't just pass. It won by a 2-to-1 margin in the House and a 24-to-3 margin in the Senate. Like huge veto-proof majorities signed by the governor. Like this is a big deal in our state. And I think, an example of what can happen when people are approached in the middle and have the opportunity to act favorably. So one of the things that I'm certainly most proud of is the collaboration between the university and Planned Parenthood that makes Her Salt Lake possible. But there's a lot of community foundation support and collaborators, including the University of Wisconsin, which we are super proud of, and eventually support from the NIH through career development projects. And the whole project really is this, somebody once said, it's like a Christmas tree. You sort of put it out there and people can hang these ornaments. And then somebody pointed out, like, Dave, as a Jewish guy, you can't get up there and say that really is not working for you. So I came up with an alternative analogy, which is, it's sort of like this park, Liberty Park in the center of Salt Lake. And in the park, there are areas where people, are playing, kids are playing on the jungle gym, and people are having picnics, and people are walking on slack lines and playing drums. And this is like that in that in the Her Salt Lake Park, researchers can come and look at sexual acceptability, and they can look at housing insecurity and sexual minority women, and really anything that's related to contraception in the U.S. And this is a picture of the Utah State Capitol, and I have spent more time this year than any other year in the last 20. And a bunch of it has been out here at a variety of protests, including the one most recently, which was the largest protest that was organized by students against gun violence that I've ever been to in Utah, and I think that ever has been in Utah. So some other great opportunities for change. And this is one of the places where this is really quite challenging. And community leadership for power shifts. We met with lifetime civil servants right at the beginning, people who run Medicaid. We found conservative cultural liaisons, legislative champions, and we're working still on expanding the Reproductive Justice Advisory Board. Marginalized people were always at the center of this. We went to the clinics where we knew there was going to be the best chance of providing this kind of care for those people. And more than half the people who come there are less than 100% of the federal poverty level, which is $1,000 a month for a single person and $2,000 a month for a family of 4. And we found almost a quarter of people have housing instability or homelessness. And that is not something we expected, but it also impacts what people get and feel like they can get. Reproductive Justice Principle 8 is that theory, strategy, and practice are integrated. And it took us time to develop this. It didn't all start with a clear path at the beginning, but I think an important message is start. Get out there and start doing things and try to identify what you feel like is reproductive justice and make progress on it. And one of the things we've been able to do is through a grant from this thing called the Sorensen Impact Center is to expand what we've done locally in Salt Lake County to a statewide initiative called Family Planning Elevated, which will essentially run in parallel to the state Family Planning Medicaid waiver, which will enable any woman at 100% or less of federal poverty level to access any method of contraception without cost. But letting that just be there and hang there is not going to necessarily be a tremendous benefit in increasing access. But having a program simultaneously train providers in IUD and implant insertion and removal and contraceptive counseling and front office staff in booking clinics and billing will be much more likely to make it have a very serious impact. And it's always good to give RBG a nod on issues of reproductive justice, and I think she very clearly spells out what's at the heart of the abortion decision and the respect and dignity that deserves. And finally, the last principle is this applies to everyone, and everyone has a role, like even an old white guy from Utah, and that this is, we need to meet the needs of everyone in this, and everyone needs to make a contribution. These are some ads from that online campaign I talked about. So we're not there, we still got a long way to go, and we still need to diversify community representation in our leadership and our practice. We need to use more languages other than English. We need to address hetero and cis normativity, and we need to do a better job of rural healthcare provision, which I could see could be an issue here as well. We've partnered with a lot of organizations for advocacy and service delivery, and are working with the 50-member clinics for the Association of Utah Community Health, the primary care network for the underserved in Utah, and certainly other issues, including our obsession potentially and focus on LARC, and centering more on women of color and women of need in the communities. So I did not do a very good job of engaging along the way, but we got plenty of time to chat now. So now's a great time to convert some of that into what you all are thinking about locally, and I'm happy to answer any questions about what we've done in Utah. Thanks.
Dave, can I actually answer?
Yeah.
How do you go first?
Well,
You go, girl.
hand the microphone across.
Yeah, you're the passer. First of all, congratulations. And I think that there are similarities between Utah and Wisconsin. You've highlighted a couple of them. It's a fabulous body of work that you've already initiated. Thank you. So my first question is, how did you get started? You know, like, what was your first, that may sound stupid, but,
No.
you know, we've been thrashing here over a bunch of issues for a while, and I think having a platform that's so inclusive and broad-based, who were your initial partners?
Right, and it's very easy to sort of wrap it up and say, oh, this is what we did, you know, and make it look like right from the beginning we had this very clear vision. And, you know, I am very much a big picture person, so great with the details. And it just started truly from this idea and frustration among the community health center providers. Like, we have got to do a better job of providing contraception to women who walk through the door here. And the first idea that I had was a grant proposal that I submitted to the national campaign for teen and unintended pregnancy, and it was called. Bedsider was kind of just recently out there, and it was called Le Bedsider, the local effect of bedsider. And what we were going to do is, this was the proposal, was to, if you go to the Bedsider website, there's a tab still that says, click here's, you know, if you want to get this method, to see if you qualify to get this method for free. And if you put in, at the time, any of the Utah zip codes, it was like, sorry, you don't qualify. So the proposal was we were going to get funding to provide IUDs and implants to anyone who lived in some clinics in Salt Lake. And then that was a bust. No money, no funding, no devices. And then we just started moving forward, and we reached out to pharma and essentially triangulated Bayer, Merck, and Teva, where they all basically said, if the other guys do it, we'll do it. And that was, you know, we were able to do that, and simultaneously we got a Society of Family Planning grant to enroll people in the study. And there's, as Jenny said at the beginning, 4,400 people enrolled in the study out of the 11,000 people who were served during the time. And then once we had the SFP grant, then we were able to go to other foundations. And all while this was happening, we had our initial community advisory board was really a fundraising board, and there are some very well-connected people who've been working on these issues for a very long time. And I think this is probably, you know, one of the things about doing it in Utah, which again I bet is similar to Wisconsin. You know, people in Utah do not take reproductive rights for granted. They know it requires vigilance and attention, and it's easy to engage people who are dedicated. And if you can coalesce people around something that they can actually do that will help, I think is really powerful. And that was something I think that made a big difference. There was also, as part of that, it turns out that the woman who used to be the lobbyist for the university, who used to sort of run interference, was also retired from that position and really wanted to help in a very constructive way. Please.
Thank you very much. What you've done is amazing. And I'm happy to say in Wisconsin we have had the privilege of having family planning waiver for decades. I'm curious, one question, followed by a second. With your family planning waiver, new availability, where can people access care through your family planning waiver? Any clinic or in our community is Planned Parenthood? But what about in Utah?
Yeah, so, you know, the law gets passed and then you've got to implement it, right? We are hoping that it's fully intended to be essentially any provider who takes Medicaid, any Medicaid provider. And you know, so there shouldn't, it shouldn't be
That's great.
limited.
So second point is what has, in the last year, for me, been rumbling around in my head is, and I love the idea that you've embraced same-day or access to same-day, whatever method, including LARCs.
Yeah.
But yet all of our systems still seem to make patients wait to step into care.
Yeah.
So when they're motivated, and I'll use an example, when Jenny Higgins motivates one of my patients to talk about birth control today,
Right.
we have been motivated by Jenny Higgins at the campus clinic
Yeah.
to be available today. We do for sore throats and influenza and a flu shot.
Right.
And so expanding that to, if you want to talk about birth control today, though most systems are not set up in any way to handle walk-in same-day contraceptive access to include LARCs. It is folks like Jenny, part of my community, that have inspired that, and we've responded because our patients, inspired by Jenny,
Yeah.
have said, why not? We get frustrated when we don't. But the thing that's been rumbling in the last year, go ahead.
Well, I think that's what's going to change it, right? You know, it all comes down to supply and demand. And when our patients demand the service and say, if this isn't something that you can do, I'm going to go to the place where they can do it, people will change, unfortunately. And on the supply side, we can attract people who need our services by improving the way that we offer the services.
Agreed. And I used to, in my old frame of mind, think, no way, we are setting people up for the ultimate frustration in their future health care by us on campus saying, you can come in today, but keep in mind, as soon as you graduate, it's going to be 3 months for you to make an appointment for an annual to talk about your birth control. So, right. So, EC. Let me just talk about EC.
Yeah.
What's been rumbling in my head for the last year is, wow, what would happen if someone would walk into any type of care, and the only way you can do it is urgent care, and say, I need a Paragard.
Yeah.
And urgent care, our systems cannot handle that. Unfortunately, also Planned Parenthood, without someone like me advocating very strongly with a personal phone call to Planned Parenthood, hey, this person has family planning waiver, needs a Paragard today.
Right.
So is your system anywhere close to, can you give us hints? How might we motivate our health systems to embrace the concept of same-day open access for contraception to meet patients when they're motivated?
Right. And let me just preface this by saying, if it were easy, it would be called vacation or cocktail hour, but it's not. And, you know, one of the places that we started, and the reason that we have really good research infrastructure at our Planned Parenthood, is we've done a lot of studies on IUD for emergency contraception. And if you want to talk about like the biggest pain in the ass to change, a system, you try to get a whole bunch of people who walked into the clinic thinking that they could just walk in and out in this super short time period and walk out with a couple of pills, and convert those, you know, ask every single one of those people, would you be interested in an IUD today? It's more effective, would provide ongoing contraception, and you could get it without cost. That, you know, if you can make that change, then the sort of, you know, standard same-day provision of IUDs and implants is actually pretty, you know, is a smaller step. Again, I think it's got to be providers like yourself who say, you know, this is based in principles of reproductive justice. People should not walk out of this clinic without their desired method if we can provide it. And it's thinking about how to work with schedules. So some of the stuff that we've done with scheduling is essentially, you know, created blocks where we can accommodate that stuff. And it's not going to work 100% perfectly all the time, but it works a lot of the time. And I think, you know, our clients and especially the staff, work is more satisfying for them. And that's one thing I did not do a good enough job with in the presentation is, expressing gratitude to the awesome staff at Planned Parenthood and our incredible research staff at the university.
How do you make it available without cost?
Pharma contributing devices certainly helped. If you've got a family planning waiver here, that'll help. And we've raised a lot of money in the community to know that, listen, we are always going to have gaps, and this is how we're going to fill them with private contributions and foundations within and beyond our community.
You guys, one more.
I just want to say that was just a fabulous presentation, and I have one little comment and one question. So first of all, I just want to say that Wisconsin has one of the most generous family planning waivers in terms of the income threshold of any state in the U.S. I'm not sure that everybody is enrolled who's eligible, and that's something we should all be keeping in mind. And my understanding is it's not just limited to Planned Parenthood, that any Medicaid provider can use the family planning waiver as to bill. But the other question I wanted to ask you, if you could just give an update on what the heck's going on with Title X and what we think the impact of that's going to be?
I wish I had a better and more thoughtful answer. My long-term answer to that is, if we're going to create the change we want to see, we need to engage people who are not traditional supporters of this, and the way to do that is starting with one-on-one conversations. And I don't know how many people signed up to be Title X grant reviewers, but large government organizations are essentially the people who show up to work every day are civil servants, and they want to do their best work, and they might not agree with the decisions that are being handed down to them, and have some freedom and latitude to act in protecting the interests of the people they serve.
That was really politically correct. Let's give a guy. That was good. Thank you.